Hello everyone, my name is Swapna. I am an alumni of Osmania University and currently a IEEE senior member. The topic that I have today is about DevOps pipelines for clinical AI, that is deploying real-time sepsis detection. Now, why is sepsis a challenge and why are we looking at the DevOps solution? Sepsis, as you may be aware, is a global healthcare crisis. It claims approximately 11 million lives, which is 20% of all the mortality that we have. What more, with every hour that's gone, the chances of mortality increases by approximately 8%. So, with the impact and the time criticality, the question here would be, can technology help in reducing these? The answer, pretty positive. Yes. When combined with process and digital transformation, it can. AI can improve the clinical outcomes when embedded into the redesigned care workflows and supported by reliable always on platform. In these high risk settings, we are talking about lives, modern DevOps and ML ops capabilities can ensure speed, reliability, observe, and zero downtime. These are strategic enablers that ensure insights reach clinicals at the moment decisions have to be taken, thus translating analytics into measurable reduction in preventable harm from sepsis. So, with this context, again, we are saying sepsis, a major healthcare crisis, time criticality, really important. If you don't have data, if it's in buckets, if it's in different ways, different sources, it's going to cause problems. And if there is downtime, you're losing time. And what is the impact here? You're talking about lives, and every hour is impactful. So it's very important that you give this data at the right time. Now coming to the phase wherein we are trying to get everything done, but is it easy in terms of implementing? Of course not. It comes with its own complexities. So, what are some of the complexities? You're talking about distributed healthcare systems. You may have vendor systems. You may have legacy electronic healthcare records, and you also need real-time streaming of data, and that is through the data pipelines that we have spoken about. And this, of course, has to be very reliable. You cannot have errors. So it should be able to get data from all the pipelines. And then what it needs to do is get into a model there should be validation for it. And of course, compliance is the key thing, right? And while you're doing all this, it's very critical that you maintain audit history from regulatory perspective. Now, coming again to the concept of you also have to have a process in place, right? You may have the data, but it should also be embedded into clinical and operational frameworks. So you have the data, but then if you're not taking the data, if there is no process and actions are not taken at based on all of this, then it's of no use. So it should be used, and the workflow should be embedded with this aligned real-time data that comes to the pipeline and helps in decision making. So with that challenges in mind, are there any things that can any platform engineering patterns to address these challenges? This slide talks to that. Some of the things that could be done is the Kubernetes orchestration, which will help in auto scaling and health checks for distributed hospital networks, geo-redundant prediction services. Then you have CI CD with clinical gates, which is basically continuous integration and continuous deployment, because you want to have validations, you want to see how the performance is, and if there is any bias, you want to detect that. So there is always a need for continuous integration and continuous deployment of data, or basically automated pipelines. Again, coming to the pipelines, why it's so important. Observability framework so that you monitor prediction, accuracy, latency, data quality, real-time alerting for model drift or issues. Infrastructure as a code, which enables to provision, manage, and recover secure, compliant and highly reliable IT infrastructure through automated version control code directly supporting patient safety and clinical operations. And the last important thing is basically SRE, which is Site Reliability Engineering for Healthcare. And it's really critical to ensure highly reliable, safe, compliant, and continuous availability when there are downtimes also, or errors can directly impact the patients. So it's very important from that perspective. So we again looked at the sepsis as a impact, how important it is to have timely data. We looked at how technology can help ensure the downtime is not there and get you everything to be accurate. Now, how do you do that? You need to have pipelines, and we saw some of the challenges that it's not just the hospital, but you may have vendor systems like labs, etc. You might have some data on legacy systems. You may also need to integrate data from various sources. And then, as we went through all those challenges, we needed to have models which required to be continuously validated. And then we looked at some of these tools which can help address the challenges, which includes the Kubernetes orchestration, CI/CD, which is again continuous integration and deployment with clinical gates, Observability framework, infrastructure as a code, and SRE for healthcare. And we'll go through some of these in the following topics as we go through the slides as well. Coming back now, so to be able to have that kind of cloud infrastructure for real-time patient monitoring, right? Real-time is what we want to do. We need to have a processing timeline, which is basic pipeline. Sorry, processing pipeline, which was our key theme that we discussed so far as well. And what that means is that there should be cloud native architecture process that processes real-time vitals of the patient, things like heart rate, blood pressure, lab values, event-driven microservices. These ensure sub-second latency for critical clinical interventions. And then when you're talking about integration, again, we looked at it slightly previously. We are talking about automated clinical workflows are triggered for clinical events like sepsis, alerting care teams and suggesting diagnostic protocols, right? You want them to be given some kind of instructions, and whatever could help, we do it. And then comprehensive audit trials is another thing that we spoke about previously also. Coming back to streamlining data pipelines and processing patient vitals. Now, some of the things that will help in streamlining data architectures that process continuous patient vital signs with minimal latency. Some technologies like Apache Kafka and cloud services ingest data from monitors, lab systems, and nursing platforms. What more? These platforms can perform future feature engineering, aggregation, and data enrichment from the EHR integration before AI models even interface. They are designed to handle variable patterns, internet and network connectivity, and ensure data accuracy. Very critical, right? Because again, when you're consolidating data, these are all real time issues that you're talking about. You could have data coming from different sources with different data patterns. There could be network issues there, and we have to ensure that there is data accuracy because we're talking about lives. Robust mechanisms like back pressure management, product downstream services, and maintain responsiveness during peak time and peak demands and critical events. That's super critical. Then we spoke about EHR integration, which is electronic health record to be able to diagnose and cure a patient. If you don't have the health record, it's going to lose a lot of time because firstly you wouldn't be able to take the right decision about the patient's health condition, and then second thing would be that it would be also you would lose out a lot of time, which is again major challenge about sepsis. We have already covered that before. So, electronic health record integration is as foundational of for clinical AI, navigating diverse platforms with proprietary data model and varied standards. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about data extraction that's critical from all these systems. It could be done via HL7FH, IR APIs, or custom interfaces. Then you need to normalize the data, right? You could have things basically just not representative of the right thing. So transforming all this heterogeneous data into standard formats, handling terminology and missing values. Because what if you had, say, one day when somebody's BP was 300 and usually his BP or her BP is only 80, then you don't want it to consider just one day, right? You want to consider, but you don't want to say average it out or something. So you would still have the data point, but you would try to normalize the data to be a true representation. And then you would have quality validation, which is basically you would implement quality checks and monitoring for accurate model interface. Now, we spoke about again sepsis as a concept, some of the technology challenges, some things that will help us. We spoke about again with respect to pipelines. All of this that we covered is it's very critical in terms of the data and in terms of getting everything integrated properly. And now, what are the different phases that we have in implementing these, right? The first phase would be the algorithm development, where models are trained with retrospective data optimized for sepsis detection. So you would do the algorithm development. Then, based on the algorithm, you would also do a retrospective validation. So you would do things like rigorous validation of handout data set across patient demographics. And then you would do a shadow deployment because you wanted to go slow and be cautious. So you would do a shadow development in terms of running in shadow mode and then generating prediction without actually doing the full scale deployment. And then you would do clinical reviews in terms of how the results are coming out. You would do a canary release, which is basically gradual release to small cohorts with continuous adverse event monitoring because you want to see how it's going. And then you would go into full production, which is basically deployment across networks with ongoing performance and drift detection. So these would be the phases that you would have. As we do this, observability is the most important thing, right? You want to see how the data is also performing in production. So how would you do that? You would do that through things like, you would do that through various things like prediction, performance metrics. You would continuously assess sensitivity, specificity, and alert rates. You would have dashboards, segment performance to identify thrift across demographics and clinical units. You would have system latency tracking, which is basically monitoring end-to-end latency from data ingestion to client alert delivery. And then you would define that would also define acceptable thresholds aligned with intervention windows. So if you have some kind of a threshold breach, then you know how quickly it should be escalated, or that is what. And then the data quality, you're talking about data, you're talking about pipelines. Data quality is of paramount importance. So automated detection of missing values and data completeness issues, alerts trigger when the data quality falls below the threshold is super key. Now, model drift detection and continuous validation. So you looked at ability and then model drift detection and continuous validation. Clinical AI models drift due to evolving patient populations, practice change, and seasonal shifts. Continuous validations compares life prediction distribution against baseline training data using statistical tests. If drift reaches the threshold, automated retraining or data science team investigation is triggered. Feedback loop with actual clinical outcomes enables supervised model updates, improving prediction accuracy and ensuring regulatory compliance. So we spoke about model detection, drift detection, and continuous validation. And now we move into SRE practices for life critical healthcare systems. So, what are some of the SRE practices? As error budgets for clinical AI, that is defining acceptable failure rates aligning with clinical impacts. Sepsis detection, as you can imagine, will have a higher detection system, and the target is about 99.95 uptime with strict latency percentiles balancing innovation velocity against reliability requirements. Incident response protocols, structured on call procedures with escalation path to DevOps engineers, data scientists, and clinical informatics team. Runbooks document common failure scenarios and remediation steps. And then blameless postmortem. Learning from incidents through detailed root cause analysis focusing on system improvements rather than individual faults. Documentation feeds continuous improvement of infrastructure and processes. Yeah, that's the last phase, and it's super critical because whenever there is something that goes wrong, we don't blame, we sit down, we think about it, what the root cause was, and we try to improve continuously because that's how things get better. Having said that, once you have done all the deployment, you have been thorough, you have continuously validated, it's definitely going to help save time and take decisions quickly, but we just don't stop at where we are. So we would just continue with the blameless postmortem and will continuously evolve. Now, as you can see, we are moving from a reactive to a proactive clinical care. We are not doing things where things have gone extremely wrong, thankfully, and we're trying to be as proactive as possible, right? And the criticality is immense. So, as you can see, modern DevOps practices are transforming healthcare from reactive treatment to proactive care, enabling earlier intervention with real-time predictive analytics in various areas, right? And here we're talking about sepsis detection. This approach prevents severe outcomes and is crucial for any mission critical domain where reliability impacts human outcomes, including fraud detection, predictive maintenance, and autonomous vehicle systems. By applying cloud narrative architectures and rigorous reliability engineering, DevOps teams deliver practical clinical impact at scale. Yeah, because we are not talking about just one patient, it's the whole system. And if it's positive, how many people it can help. So that brings us towards the end of the presentation. Some of the key takeaways that we had is you have infrastructure as foundation. We spoke about Kubernetes, streamlining and infrastructure as a code, ensuring reliable, reproducible deployments across healthcare networks. We said validation gates really do matter. Clinical validation, shadow deployment, and canary releases protects us, right? It protects us against regressions, enabling continuous improvement of clinical algorithm. Observability beyond uptime, monitoring predictions, accuracy, latency, and data quality ensures clinical utility and detects model drift before patient impact. Very key. And then reliability engineering, which is the last topic that we touched upon. Then SRE practices like error budget and incident response ensure operational excellence, protecting patients from system failures. That brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you again. Just to reiterate, my name again is Speaker, and we can go ahead with any questions from here on. Thanks.